There's so many different mechanics and themes that this card touches on.
It's not common to find a card that can enable all of these different points of interaction.
It morphs decks, right, into a particular direction.
Distraction makers.
There's been this card that I want to talk about for a long time.
Yep.
It's one of my favorite cards. And it's not just because I like its impact on the game. It's because I also think it's a card that really well illustrates a particular design concept.
Brought this card to me and I thought that's really cool, but then we kind of talked about it a little bit more and I thought, this could be actually kind of a cool series, is to take more of a very, very specific look at an individual card of Magic and then sort of extrapolate that and find greater design lessons when looking at these individual cards. And so if you guys have any sort of cards that you think are really cool that you'd be interested in us talking about, just let us know and we'll take a look, because there's a lot of cards out there.
We could make 30,000 episodes.
We could. We probably won't make that many.
We're gonna start at A and work our way through.
Great.
To zombie. The card is Life from the Loam. And this came out in original Ravnica. It costs a green and a colorless. It is a sorcery that says you may return up to 3 lands from your graveyard to your hand, and then it also has Dredge 3. Dredge is that whenever you would draw a card, it's a replacement effect that whenever you would draw a card, you can instead bring this from your graveyard to your hand and then put 3 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard.
Dredge in general, I think, does a lot for this card, but I think Dredge is just not a mechanic that I think is talked about enough. I don't see it at the table almost ever.
It doesn't get a lot of play in Commander.
I think that's what's kind of sparked this, right? For some reason, you and I were looking at it after recording, I think last time, and we saw it was 4% of all decks.
Yeah. Life from the Loam is in about 4% of decks on EDH Rec. So let's talk about Life from the Loam in a vacuum first, right? Like as an individual card. On the surface, you would look at this card and go, oh, okay, well, I can dredge with it and get lands into my graveyard, and then I can play Life from the Loam and get those lands back in my hand. And you are correct. That is the first surface level thing that this card does. So before we continue the video, we have something really cool to share with you. One of our community members, Ralph, has released Fathomless Gears. It's a tabletop tactical RPG that focuses on grid-based combat. Super interesting.
We played Fathomless Gears in like one of our first test nights actually on the Discord.
Yeah.
If you're really a fan of that sort of turn-based, like tactical grid-based like combat, really interesting, really cool mechanics. Really like the customizability with the different, like the fact that you have to like slot all your gear into this like inventory manager and stuff is really interesting.
They even made an app for it, so you can like customize your mech by placing components into like this grid system. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Congrats to Ralph for completing his game.
We love you, Ralph. Congratulations, and I hope it goes well.
Woo. Woo! The link is in the description. Then when we start to go below the surface a little bit to start revealing how large the iceberg under this is, we go, I guess, next to the fact that, okay, well, if those lands also do something, then there's additional value that you can get here. And as time has gone on, there's been a lot more lands that function as spells or do various things. Some of the most obvious being Strip Mine, that you can sacrifice this land to destroy another land. There's the cycling lands, which you pay a mana to discard it and draw a card. And then there's the spell lands from Kamigawa, like Boseiju and Otawara. And these all interact really well with Life from the Loam, sort of creating almost their own little package of card advantage, a little like their own card advantage engine within that ecosystem. And you can sort of run that package as small or big as you want within your deck, right? So you could run a tight Life from the Loam spell lands from Kamigawa package and not worry about the other stuff. Or you could expand and play as many of these sort of land-like effects as you want. I guess sort of the final note on this sort of Life from the Loam iceberg before we get to what this card sort of represents design-wise. It's connective tissue between these lands, but then on top of that, those lands can kind of connect to other synergistic pieces. The most famous probably being the cycling lands with Astral Slide. So you can cycle the land to blink a creature to get value off the creature, and then you can off that cycle, instead of drawing the card, you can dredge life from the loam, play it again, get the cycling lands back, and repeat this process.
It's not common to find a card that can enable all of these different points of interaction. It seems like Life from the Loam has so many different ways that it can interact with any one particular strategy that green as a color can usually connect to, which is really interesting.
There's so many different mechanics and themes that this card touches on that sort of creates this connective tissue. If it's a graveyard strategy, this fits. If it's a land strategy, it fits. But then from that land strategy can cascade into so many other effects. Or even just, the fact that the lands themselves can be the value pieces.
The design philosophy that we're going to kind of use Life from the Loam as a way of discussing this is glue. We're taking this from something Mark Rosewater has brought up on his podcast. He's talked about glue being a term specifically for drafting. But I think glue is used beyond that. It's not just about drafting. It's about any one card that can sort of be connective tissue between multiple strategies. Beyond that, finding these individual cards, especially with how popular Commander is in a singleton format, finding these individual cards that sort of can connect and branch out across these different strategies is very difficult to find.
Mark often talks about glue in the sense of limited, like you said, right, where you sort of need this connective tissue between different archetypes in limited, because you need players to be able to draft from various sections of a card pool to end up filling out a particular archetype. Changelings being the perfect example of this idea. You're playing Kithkin or Treefolk or whatever, there's not really a whole lot of crossover between what people are drafting, right? We're not interacting over the drafting part of the game. And so Changelings come in to kind of not only fill in those gaps, but give us some types of cards to fight over. Life from the Loam it didn't really do that in limited, because there's just not that many archetypes that had overlapping reasons to draft this card. It's also a rare, so it's not going to come up that much. Life from the Loam in particular highlights something of the strengths of constructed Magic. It morphs decks, right, into a particular direction, right? It doesn't work like Rhystic Study does, where Rhystic Study is just blanket one of the best card draw cards in any deck, any blue deck, where Life from the Loam says, I am an extremely good value engine, but only in very specific circumstances.
It touches a little bit on what we talked about before of quantity versus quality cards, in that in Commander, quality cards are just a lot more popular because in a singleton format, you're more likely to run into any individual very strong card, right? And because you're less likely to run into similar cards of a similar effect, you might as well make sure that each individual card is just powerful, right? But Life from the Loam, it's what, like you were saying, is like even in a 100-card singleton, it can still be useful, assuming that you have that engine and the support for it to be able to do its job. It's a lot different when you run into sort of maybe a connective tissue card that is more set driven. Looking at Outlaws of Thunder Junction, right? They had plot. And so I think there's a card that is like all your plot costs are like 1 or 2 less or something like that. And it's like, well, that has such a limited scope and range of usability that it's like maybe you could squeeze that in a Commander deck, but there's not a lot of options for you. But Life from the Loam at this point, I think, is general enough and expansive enough that it can fit into multiple strategies.
I do wonder about how many of these types of cards can even exist in Magic, right?
Yeah.
There's only so many different ways you can connect all of these different mechanics and things without the card becoming either one like way too powerful and ending up in every deck, or being too narrow like plot.
And it's interesting because when you were showing me Life from the Loam, I was like, okay, this seems like it would be a little bit more for like an econ strategy. And you pointed out that in the past there had actually been rush strategies that used this type of a card.
I would say like mid-range rush though, not like aggro rush. So Seismic Assault is probably the best indicator of this, and it's like Seismic Assault costs 3 red mana to get into play, so like it's not coming down until a few turns into the game anyway, but you're basically outvaluing your opponent, but you're doing so in like an aggressive way, right? So it's an econ strategy that probably leans towards being more aggressive, right? You're assembling a critical mass of cards like Rush would, right? Where all of your lands are 2 damage, right? Because of Seismic Assault, right? So you're sort of like stapling 2 damage onto all of the lands that are in your deck. And then alongside Loam, you can just get back, like you're able to get 3 shocks a turn. 6 damage a turn kills your opponent when they only have 20 life pretty quickly.
You're not utilizing Life from the Loam to try and make sure that you're filling your hand with lands for the resource generation. You're using it as a weapon, right? Yeah. But Life from the Loam is still the thing enabling you to be able to do that at the cadence that you're wanting it.
Right, and Seismic Assault and Astral Slide are similar in that way, right? Astral Slide's leaning more towards the econ side of this rather than the rush side of this, but it is turning all of your lands in your hand, your cycle lands in your hand, into flicker spells, right? Sure. So you're outvaluing your opponent that way in a long-term kind of way, where Seismic Assault is like, how do I just, turn all of my lands into shocks? So it's interesting. And like Loam is the thing that's enabling these things to happen. It's hard to imagine a way to connect more disparate mechanics, right?
Right. I think that at its simplest, right, when we talk about a card's function having multiple uses, I think that generally that makes for a more engaging experience. I think there's a place for a card to not have that, right? So this would be the difference between Lava Spike versus a Lightning Bolt. What's interesting about Lightning Bolt being able to be versatile in that way is that oftentimes what strategies do is that you're picking either Econ or Rush, but you have to splash into interaction or defense at times. And Lightning Bolt being versatile in that way means that you can use it to kill a creature or use it as, pseudo removal in a sense, or you can use it to hit a player directly.
That's like part of the bolt the bird analogy, right? Is like, okay, well, the heuristic is bolt the bird, but you don't always want to do it, right? And the times when you want to do it is when you're viewing Lightning Bolt as a defensive spell rather than a rush spell.
And that sort of decision making only comes from just opening up that space, right? From being, instead of it being directly to the player, it's to any target creature. And so these sort of small changes, right, of opening the doors up increases more possibilities for any one card's function, right? And how it can be put into decks of different archetypes. And I think that the problem is what we're talking about is like, if you end up opening that up too much, it can potentially be a broken card. So it's very rare.
It could serve any purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
It's very rare to find these particular cards that, one, I think it's really, it's interesting that it's green, right? So it can be splashed with many other colors, right? I could see this card not seeing nearly as much play if it were two colors.
Oh, sure. Yeah. If it was like green-black or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting seeing this card. As far as I know, I don't know as much about Life from the Loam as you do, but I'm assuming that this never saw any bannings or restrictions.
Not as far as I know.
And so it's like clearly seen as just powerful enough, right, and engaging enough into these different strategies without going too over the top into a dangerous territory.
Because of its like enabler status, it's based on the relative power of the things that you can do with it, right? Like if you're getting a bunch of strip mines with it, that's pretty powerful, right? You can shut your opponent off from land while you keep, dredging Life from the Loam and getting your lands back. But if it's played in an environment where the best thing you can do is cast the Kamigawa spell lands, right? It's still powerful, but it's not that same level of power, right? So Life from the Loam itself, I don't think would be the problematic card in that scenario. It's the stuff that is around it, in that space between, like, is this a rush card or is this a defense card like Lightning Bolt? Yeah. This is like, okay, is this a economy card or is it, I guess, a rush card? It could be a defense card. It just depends on what you're playing with it, right?
That's what I think is interesting, right? Is because Lightning Bolt, I think, is really easy to be able to teach that concept to new players, right? Of, hey, are you trying to win right now, right? Or are you going to be interacting with your opponent? And those are the two variables that you have to consider. Life from the Loam, because there's so many different ways it can interact, you don't probably want it to only interact with these one things, right? It allows you to sort of create decisions when deck constructing that then help feed that overall engine, right? But it's all centered around this one particular card that's enabling that.
Right, and it's a necessity. Right, like you can't just put Life from the Loam in the deck, like in any deck, and expect it to be good. You have it warps the deck in its direction, or the deck is already in that direction and it just slots right in. In Commander, I think that's ultimately what ends up happening for the most part. Is that the sort of the since there's only one copy, the glue isn't as strong. It's not super glue the way that it is in 1v1 constructed where you can play 4 copies.
If you enjoyed listening to us talk about Life from the Loam and glue as a design term, please feel free to give us a little like and a subscribe, maybe a comment down below. Please, if you have any other cards to suggest, leave a comment down below.
Also, if you want to continue talking about Life from the Loam, because it is one of the best cards in Magic, you can join our Discord. Link is in the description below. And thanks for watching. We will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Just forget to actually
never
say the
say
card.
it,
Yeah.
People try to guess what it is.
At 15 minutes, we sign off and we go, oh, that's right. It's
Oh,
Life
right.
from the Loam.